Good afternoon. Thank you for your flexibility. We did order a better day weather-wise. We've done our best. As we meet today, we acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful part of the world, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and we thank God for their incredible care of it for thousands of years, and pray that we later comers might actually learn to do a better job and follow their example. We're here today because about a month ago a number of churches decided that they needed to become places of sanctuary, or offer to be places of sanctuary for those who risk being removed to Nauru. There's been an amazing transformative response to that call. And really it's all about making Australia a place of sanctuary. So we've been joined not only by churches, but by teachers, medical people, comedians, writers, all sorts of wonderful people, including state premiers and the Chief Minister of the ACT. So I think we're well on the way to making Australia a place of sanctuary. And it's very much a people-led movement and can only be sustainable and successful if we, the people, make it so. The Lady Cilento Hospital vigil, I think, proved the point. So I'm incredibly grateful that you're here today to be part of this, and I'm incredibly grateful to all who have helped to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Katz. My name's Dave Copeland from the Queensland Community Alliance, and I'll be helping run today. I'd now like to invite Sonia Caton, a prominent refugee activist and lawyer, up to give us a bit of an overview of the current situation facing the 267 people and others who are facing risk of deportation. Please welcome her.
Thank you all for coming out, and I also wish to pay my respects to the traditional elders of this land. And just a quick note that our federal parliament does not open every year with a welcome to country. I think it should, because maybe it would have some impact on the laws that are passed there, because the laws I'm about to talk to you about today are not welcoming. They're anything but. So the 267 mothers, babies, fathers that form this cohort who are now liable to be transferred back to Nauru are in fact a group of a much larger group of people, and they are all, and I use that word people. They are people who came from Iran, from Afghanistan, from Sri Lanka, from their stateless Rohingya, from Burma. They have all fled situations of real persecution, of fear for their lives, and they have been fleeing, seeking safety. The reason they made those perilous journeys was this was a country, Australia, who was a signatory to the Refugee Convention. Unbeknownst to them, when they crossed into Australian territory on a boat without a visa, they arrived either on or after the 13th of August 2012. Unbeknownst to them, their arrival into Australian territory, in fact, was not Australian territory because we excised Australia from the Migration Act. And they became, unbeknownst to them, unauthorised maritime arrivals under Section 5AA of the Migration Act. This flipped into another section, Section 189AD, which says all unauthorised maritime arrivals who arrived on or after the 13th of August must be removed to a regional processing country as soon as practicable. And so therein lay the power for them to be removed to either Manus and Nauru, and they were. The other thing is, if they had tried to lodge a visa here, it wouldn't have been considered a valid visa application, irrespective of what application it was, because under this raft of amendments, Section 46A says if you're an unauthorised maritime arrival, any visa application you lodged will not be valid. So a great number of people have been removed now, almost just under 1,000 in Manus, and the latest stats I have at the back, I'll go back to that, on Nauru. What has happened is people have suffered either in riots or through debilitating health conditions really severe mental and physical trauma, and some people have had complications arising with birth or needed to come back to give birth for other reasons. It seemed to have become a harsher policy for transferring back for birth. So the minister had that power to allow them to be brought back largely for medical treatment, and as they arrived, they became, under Section 5 of the Migration Act, transitory persons. Transitory persons cannot lodge valid visa applications. And though where we are at now with this 267 and others from Manus who are here, and I keep saying Manus because we have a situation that applies to all offshore processing. The situation is that the High Court case challenged another provision within Section 198 saying that people could be detained lawfully in regional processing countries. It challenged the constitutionality of that, and the lawfulness of that provision was upheld. So the 267 had undertakings by the government not to be removed back until that High Court case was concluded. Because if it had been found that regional processing was unconstitutional, they would have stayed here while they tried to sort out the long-term ramifications of all of that. So now they are subject to removal again, though some, like baby Asher, have, with the help of pro bono lawyers, and the 267 are too many for them to, all individually have a lawyer, have been seeking new undertakings from the department that they will not be transferred back. And within this, what they are looking at is another provision within Section 198, which says the minister, and it must be the minister personally, can actually, in the national interest, waiver the law that says they have to be taken back to Nauru or Manus and keep them here. The argument has been that within that there is a decision, and therefore as a decision, natural justice applies, procedural fairness. You should have the right of reply. And there are some ministerial guidelines that are attached to these sections, which list all sorts of things which when you read them through, you go, gee, that sounds reasonable. I bet every one of them's got a good case and should stay here. But as we've seen in practice, what procedure says can sound very reasonable, but we've had men from Manus who are represented by the Refugee and Immigration Legal Service with terrible psychological conditions who were removed back despite an undertaking. So that hasn't been happening so much lately, but the basis of asking for these undertakings is that they be given 72 hours notice of removal so that representatives can put before the minister reasons why they should not be removed, really compelling reasons, and that he consider that, and then waive the law that's saying they have to be taken back as soon as practicable when the temporary purpose when they've been brought here for a temporary purpose, whether that purpose has been achieved or not, the law actually says. So the thing about that is that the minister actually has no compulsion to even look at something like that. The law says the only people that can put that kind of submission before him, actually the policy says that, not the law, is department staff. He can't be forced to look at it, he can't be forced to make a decision. His decision to look at it, to not look at it, to exercise the discretion to not exercise it is non-appellable, non-reviewable. So it is a matter for the minister only, 267 people. I think because of people like you, there is now a public momentum which is exerting real pressure on the government and pressure that it is responding to. And so that the undertakings given now, it may be determined in the national interest not to send them back. We've had, in just the last couple of years, major reviews by the Australian Human Rights Commission on children in detention. Following that, the government commissioned its own review, the Moss Review, which concluded every child should be brought back from Nauru. And we've also had the Senate inquiry into offshore detention. All of these three inquiries elicited evidence of just terrible harm and conditions in offshore processing countries, Nauru and Manus. And this comes on top of that. We've also had baby Farouz, and baby Asher. All the same laws are applying to those two babies. They are very identifiable, and so it's the sanctuary touchstone is carrying on a real momentum of experts and people within the community who are saying the same thing. So it's very, very important to continue this momentum. So I guess the options of what happens now is the minister actually has, and you know, if you're here as a transitory person, section 46B says you can't lodge a valid application, but the minister again has a personal power to lift these legislative bars, they're called, and allow people to make a valid visa application. Of course, because they're unauthorised maritime arrivals, the only applications they'll be able to make are for temporary protection visas and the safe haven enterprise. Nevertheless, he has that power, so the pressure needs to be maintained. They can stay, they can apply for visas, they can be resettled in Australia if it's determined to be in the national interest, and we're all saying it's in the national interest and it's in accordance with international human rights law. So I guess that's the situation, maintaining the pressure, saying the bar should be lifted, allow them to apply for protection here. Those that are in detention, it's very hard to do anything if the minister decides to remove back to Nauru, because they are quarantined away. They're frequently denied timely access to any kind of legal representation. So even if they were subject to an undertaking, it's very hard to get to the lawyers in time for information which may stop a further removal to be lodged. But again, he doesn't even have to look at them. Those that are in community, hopefully it won't come to this, but if it does, this is where the sanctuary movement comes into play. This is where, if anybody seeks sanctuary in a church, this is the community saying, we believe it's in the national interest. We are saying this is the national interest, and you should exercise your discretion to allow them to stay and lodge an application for protection. Now, just to go statistical for a moment, the latest statistics from Nauru and Manus show that the overwhelming majority have been processed and have been found to be owed protection. So the other thing is that a lot of the people who are subject to this are Iranians, and I think there might be another agenda running around seeking to stop Iranians leaving their country to seek protection. But there is a strong cohort of Afghans, Sri Lankans, some Vietnamese, and also Rohingya, stateless Rohingya. A lot of the Iranians, they're being called Iranians, but bear in mind they're actually stateless Faili Kurds. We can talk about their status another time, but it's a very difficult matter when you're dealing with stateless people, because they can potentially be held in detention indefinitely. The other thing to notice is most people who are subject to this cohort, the 267, have been in detention solidly in one form or another for 2 years or more. They are reducing the numbers, they are putting them into community detention, but they're pretty traumatised from that. You only have to read those inquiries that I mentioned to know that. So that's the legal situation generally. Another thing to bear in mind is that if we succeed and they are permitted to lodge applications for protection, they're not entitled to any support for legal representation. And that's where we need to kick in to fund free community legal clinics to help them fill out their forms, fill out their protection applications, be with them in their protection interviews. That comes down the track. But we need to be building up those resources, and there are many in the community working on that now. So thank you very much for coming today and listening to me. My time is up and I'm off. Exit stage left now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And you may notice we're going to keep this very much to time. People who are outside, if you can come in, we're only going to be in this room for another about 20 minutes, and then we're moving into the cathedral.
If anybody wants to sit down in the front who doesn't mind crossing legs and squishing in, please come right on around.
So we'll be moving through shortly, so if you're standing, you're not going to be standing for ages.
If there's younger people who can do it first, so some of the older people can sit.
That's great. It's a lovely problem to have so many people here. When I look at the people we have here, I see very faithful and very reasonable people. And so it's important that as part of our reason that we consider what the laws are and that the lack of justice that exists in our current laws as we make a decision to defy acts to remove people and to hold them and to protect them while they're in sanctuary. So part of the purpose of this was to say this is what the status is at the moment, so that when we're making this choice to actually say that we are going to stand in opposition to that we're not doing this blindly, we're doing this informed and as reasonable people. And actually there's a long history and tradition of people shaping and making their communities more just by doing exactly what we're doing. And I'd like to invite someone who himself has quite a history and tradition in this act, Dave Andrews, to come and give us a bit of a background on this.
Oh, you've got my notes.
Yep, they were up on the note. It's okay.
Thank you. I too would like to honour the traditional owners and all those elders who've gone before, who have set an example of generosity and hospitality and welcome that we would do well to remember. Some say non-violent resistance is passive resistance, but we say non-violent resistance is active resistance, that is proactive and not reactive. Non-violent direct action refuses to return evil for evil, resisting the temptation to fight violence with violence, in getting sucked into the cycles of violence and counter-violence that are destroying our world. Non-violent direct action strives to overcome evil with good, practicing the discipline of non-violence in the face of violence. Not treating others the way that they treat us, but treating them the way we would like to be treated. And in so doing, starting revolutions of radical love that have been astonishingly powerful and successful. Now, when we think of great practitioners of non-violent direct action, we think of people like Desmond Tutu and Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi. But they thought of people like Jesus Christ as the archetypal non-violent activist. And early Christianity is the classic non-violent campaign of resistance against the domination of the empire and the oppression of vulnerable people. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Christ, so kind that he taught his followers not to retaliate when struck, but turn the other cheek," was a beautiful example of the perfect person. Jesus may have lost his life on the cross, but Jesus did not lose the battle. Jesus won, as the world's history has abundantly shown. And thus, he says, the example of Christ is a crucial factor in my underlying faith in non-violence. In times of crisis, people remember this story and reclaim the legacy of non-violent resistance. And they resolve to write new chapters for the old book in blood and sweat and tears. In the 1940s, when the Germans overran France, and most people around the world thought it was impossible for anybody to effectively non-violently resist the Nazi regime, the Christians in a little village of Les Chambon declared their community sanctuary, refused to hand over a single Jew, who they hid in their homes, and they helped over 5,000 people escape to Switzerland. Since 2014, direct actions confronting the cruelty of our government's asylum seeker policies have been conducted by Christians all around this country. So far, Love Makes a Way has organised 31 prayer vigils in the offices of government politicians. 270 people have risked arrest, and 174 people, including many priests and pastors and nuns, and our very own Dr. Peter Catt, have been arrested. Since 2015, Australians of all faiths and none have demonstrated the belief that the time has come for us to move beyond protest to non-cooperation and civil disobedience. Staff from detention centres have deliberately and repeatedly risked criminal charges by breaking the code of silence to speak on behalf of the people in their care. And doctors and nurses have risked their medical careers by steadfastly refusing to obey directives to discharge patients back into the unsafe conditions of detention centres. More than 100 congregations around Australia have joined Dr. Peter Catt and the people of St John's in declaring their churches sanctuary for asylum seekers. And now it is time for us to join them to write another entry in the history of non-violent resistance in this country, in our own blood, sweat and tears. Each of us who feel inadequate need to realise our capacity to act. And each of us who feel afraid need to realise our courage to act. Each of us who feel impotent need to recognise the potential of our actions. And each of us who feel insignificant need to recognise the importance of our actions. Every act of truth is a victory over the lies. Every act of love is a victory over the cruelty. And every act of kindness is a victory over violence. And every risk a person takes to make a stand to accept, respect, and protect asylum seekers is a victory in our strong but gentle struggle to make our dream of a better world a reality here and now in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. And this action that we are taking here today is part of a nationwide string of actions. It's been coordinated by the Australian Christian Response to Refugees and Get Up, as well as the Human Rights Law Centre and Love Makes a Way. But here today there's a range of people, a number of whom would have been here and done some Love Makes a Way training in non-direct action, is that correct? And people who have raised their hands? Great, okay. But there's a number of people who haven't. And so the next thing I'd like to do is invite Erin Kennedy to come and get us to have a bit of a conversation quickly. And after this, we're then going to leave and go into the cathedral.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here, and having an overcrowded room is a fabulous problem to have today. So bear with us, and just for the next few minutes, what we'd invite people to do now is just to turn to somebody nearby, preferably somebody you don't know. There's a lot of very interesting, fabulous people in this room right now, and just to chat for a couple of minutes around the question of what brought you here today. And as Dave asked, some of you have been along to plenty of things over the years, and the beautiful thing about this momentum is it's encouraging people who have never been involved in something like this to come. So thank you for being brave, for getting on board, and for helping to grow this momentum. So that question, what brought you here today? What inspired you? What motivated you to come out in the rain on this day today and just chat to the person nearby about why you are here? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, what I'd like people to do is you can keep having those discussions now, but what I'd like you to do is, while you're talking, if we can exit through these two doors, so half of you out that door, half of you out this door, if we can go into the cathedral proper, and if we can see ourselves in the front rows, facing towards the altar.
In Brisbane, I also just let them stay in Brisbane as
Next Sunday's rally. That's it. Oh, it's mine.
yeah,
No,
that's in the
that's yeah.
Oh, good, yeah. Yeah. Did you remember? Yeah. Oh, isn't it? Brilliant.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to get up there again. Slightly different acoustics here. So the next piece we're going to do, and I'll just give you a bit of an overview of the next hour, because we're going to keep this slightly at a time. We're going to run through some of the scenarios around which we may take action. We'll then provide a brief for a manoeuvre, an action that we will do ourselves on the stairs of the cathedral, and that will be the conclusion of this event. This is a public action, and we're inviting media attention. So we have journalists from the mainstream press here. And part of what we're doing today is sending a message that not only are we here and training and preparing ourselves to take this action, but we're doing so, as Sonia said, so that we can prevent the need for it almost, by demanding of our government that they change their stance and that they let them stay. And this action arose out of a range of things. It arose out of preparations after the High Court challenge, the Let Them Stay coalition was created. But it also arose out of something much more organic. And that was the action that a whole lot of us took at the Lady Seneca Hospital. And that was remarkable. For 10 days, a revolving group of people staffed that vigil and stood alongside the doctors and nurses and health professionals and said, we will not allow our government to do something which they may have the legal power for now with the High Court challenge, but they have no moral legitimacy if they do so. And we stood behind the decisions of our medical fraternity that this was not a safe thing to do to a child or their family. There were some key things out of the Lady Seneca vigil that we want to draw out as an action protocol was conducted in a way that in the hospital, and we did everything possible to mitigate any potential discomfort for the kids who were in that hospital who, you know, and I know from my own kids being there and my family kids, are often there in a real period of stress and hurt. So that all of those things were taken in. What also happened is that participants in the vigil encaged their own network. So organically run, made a decision that we were going to do something in 6 hours, and we asked people to come. And every time we did that, we had more than 200 people come because of the networks of people connecting in. And another key part that I wanted to lift up is that people took on a range of different roles. So some people played a role of coordinating. The unions in particular made sure that there was ice and that there was some way of coordinating the shade. Refugee Action Collective were really the people who made sure that the signs were there and put out the initial calls for action. There was a person who showed up on the day and said, I'll be the food coordinator because we had so much donations of food. Don Cinnamon pulled together Don's here somewhere, pulled together the timetable. And just an example of just being brought together role-playing, which is how we organise things. I don't think anyone here knew they were going to be holding these things up until about 30 seconds ago. But these are examples of, and if there is a confrontation, interrupting the vigil and let people going on. There also needs to be food coordinators, people who are ensuring that if people are going to maintain a vigil, that their basic human needs are met in terms of food, sleep, shelter, all of those kind of roles. Then there are roles which are, I've given you one example of non-violent direct action, but it may take, and a second obvious one is here. This cathedral is a potential place of sanctuary, and one of the things we'll be acting out is non-violent direct action to protect this sanctuary. So it will be if there are people in here who have sought asylum and are seeking sanctuary, it will be acting outside of